Howdy y'all, welcome back to another video. This one is going to be a bit different again, as I will be utilizing this video as a way to clear through a lot of the bad takes I hear in regards to abortion and just cement the practical arguments to keep in mind when you hear people talking about abortion. So get ready for a breakneck cavalcade of ideas and facts about the dreaded abortion debate. And hopefully you'll leave this video with at least some new pieces of information. So, abortion is something that has existed in some form or another for thousands of years, predating even things like the Bible. It has taken different forms with varying levels of social acceptance since civilizations came into existence. However, the legality of such a thing is still a heated point of debate even in modern America. Even though Roe v. Wade occurred in the early 70s, there is still a crusade in America to restrict a woman's right to an abortion for what many feel are justified platitudes. Unfortunately, the reality is that even though people feel like they are fighting for the sanctity of life and betterment of society, it seems to do quite the opposite. For example, there is a widely demonstrated effect that as legal abortion access rises, we simultaneously see a substantial drop in our crime rate. Applying this knowledge, the restriction of abortions then necessarily results in there being more crime than there would have been if there was more widely available abortion access. We'll take a look at more of this in a bit. Around the world, we tend to see that in areas with worse education, higher rates of violence, crime, or poverty, we also see higher restrictions on abortion. Why is this? Well, the answer is somewhat simple. People who would have otherwise aborted their pregnancy, being forced to have to carry it out either by legal or societal pressures, are much less likely to provide the child a good home, and thus give the child less of a chance of being able to live a happy and healthy life, and seems to drastically increase the chances that the child will either be the perpetrator or victim of crime. Abortions aren't usually something that are sought by people in good socioeconomic conditions, because if they were to have a child, they would be more secure in their ability to raise the child, with the nurture and financial backing the child requires. However, for poorer people, having an accidental pregnancy and being forced to carry out the birth and raise the child will be far more economically devastating. The children that are raised in these low-income homes have much less of a chance of succeeding or escaping poverty, and are much more at risk for being the victims of sexual or physical violence. I dare to say, close to all of the people that have abortions are doing so not because they hate children and want to murder their infant, but rather because they deem it a necessity to either spare themselves or the child from falling prey to the underbelly of society. Because when you're poor, less people care about you or if you succeed. People on the pro-life side seem to argue for the sanctity of the fetus's life, but don't seem to care at all about the well-being of people in the lowest socioeconomic conditions. In fact, the rhetoric in America essentially tends to blame the poor for their lack of success. It's easy to argue for beings that are completely hypothetical, as any unborn being is. They don't exist yet, and thus can be assigned traits or characteristics to enhance the sympathetic value of their existence. By assigning a will to live to beings that don't exhibit any emotional or conscious experience is a virtue signal that they care more about the most defenseless conceptual being possible. It's frustrating that they will fight so hard for beings that do not and may not ever come into existence, even without abortion, but don't apply the same energy to the fact that if they force someone to carry out that birth, that there is an extremely elevated chance that now two beings are stuck in a subsistent existence. In America, and I'm sure in many other portions of the world, a major justification for the pro-life activism and anti-abortion lawmaking is derived from a belief that life begins at conception and that abortion is murder. The reasoning behind this is almost always biblical. When it's not biblical, it is purely philosophical, as to argue that a human life is equivalent to a zygote is to argue against any sort of scientific consensus. When talking in biblical terms, the view is that God grants every individual being a specific, predetermined personality and essence at the point of conception. However, this seems to contradict with the biblical God's treatment of the unborn. This is also disregarding of how much the Bible is simply God directing his people to commit genocide. God seems okay with abortion if he tells someone to do it, just as he is okay with murder as long as he directs it. Heads up, this next section is really dark as I'll be quoting some scripture. Hosea 13:16. The people of Samaria must bear their guilt, because they have rebelled against their God. They will fall by the sword, their little ones will be dashed to the ground, their pregnant women ripped open. 2 Kings 8:12. And Hazael said, Why does my Lord weep? He answered, Because I know the evil that you will do to the people of Israel. You will set on fire their fortresses, and you will kill their young men with the sword, and dash in pieces their little ones, and rip open their pregnant women. 2 Kings 15:16. At that time Menahem, starting out from Tirzah, attacked Tiphsah, and everyone in the city and its vicinity, because they refused to open their gates. He sacked Tiphsah and ripped open all the pregnant women. Deuteronomy 28:53. Because of the suffering your enemy will inflict on you during the siege, you will eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of the sons and daughters the Lord your God has given to you. Exodus 21:22-25. If people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman, and she gives birth prematurely, or she miscarries, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, so on and so forth. 1 Samuel 15:3. Now go and attack the Amalekites, and completely destroy everything they have. Do not spare them. Kill men and women, infants and nursing babies, oxen and sheep, camels and donkeys. There are so many other passages to see how much of a regard God had for human life, and if he even considered the unborn to be alive, or the same as children. But I want to leave off this section with a brief synopsis of Numbers 5:11-31, the test of an unfaithful wife. The Lord said to Moses that if a man is jealous and suspects his wife of adultery, but there are no witnesses, he is to take his wife to a priest. The priest creates a concoction that if the woman is impure, her stomach will swell and she will miscarry. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems to be God telling jealous men that think their wives cheated to force her to have an abortion. God has always had very little regard for human life and never portrayed unborn children as anything other than property or potential continuation of a bloodline, but made clear distinction between the unborn and birthed children, except in their equal disposability. I want to make clear that callousness is not my aim here, but rather my position comes from a place of sympathy. I understand that people may have sex outside of conditions in which they'd rear a child, as reproduction is literally our most primary drive. To minimize chance of an unwanted pregnancy, we should make contraception and birth control widely and easily available, as well as proper sex education. However, these are also something that many in the pro-life community believe is immoral. They aren't looking to ensure people are having safe sex and avoiding pregnancy. They want to, by law, restrict people's ability to have sex outside of marriage. Of course, this is something that will largely affect women over men, as a man can have endless sex without risk of himself becoming pregnant, but a woman can have sex once and become pregnant. Thus, obviously, this begs the question, why is it that this seems more about restricting an individual's freedom, and particularly a woman's, to have premarital sex more so than because they care about human beings? You will also find that there is a huge crossover between people that are pro-life and people that are anti-welfare. If pro-lifer policies are to be enacted, we would see a massive uptake in crime and illegal or self-performed abortions, as well as drastically increasing the amount of people that are impoverished. And with an unwillingness to provide government benefits to low-income households, now we are talking about actual living children starving to death, or having to watch their parents or even the children themselves be degraded to a subhuman level and put into circumstances of extreme depravity, misery, and indignance. As a reminder, up until the point of birth, there could be any number of complications that could result in the lack of viability of life to come from the fetus. We truly do not know if the embryo growing inside is going to become a person until after they are born. And even after birth, any number of complications can happen before the child becomes conscious and can actually recognize their own experience, develop emotions, memory, and really any characteristics that we use to define a human being. This is not advocating for people to have post-birth abortions, as there is no such thing as a post-birth abortion. It is literally just murder to kill a baby. People that want abortion to be available are not advocating for the murder of children. They are advocating for a person's ability to terminate a pregnancy so they do not have a child. When a woman miscarries, it's sad if they were hoping the embryo would develop into a human being. However, there are many miscarriages that happen before a woman will even realize they are pregnant. The lives lost to these miscarriages are not treated the same as an actual human life, again, unless a person prematurely is assigning characteristics to the potential life inside of a womb. But assigning characteristics to an unborn child is not the same thing as a fetus actually being a live human being. If we, by law, required women to carry out an unwanted pregnancy that may not even result in the birth of a child, it runs the risk of seriously damaging the woman's body, only for the child to be put into the adoption system in which there are millions of children who will never be adopted, which will only increase with the restriction of abortion. Or the child will be raised in an environment that is not facilitated for them and puts them at risk for great trauma and harm. I find this to be utterly morally reprehensible. But of course, to many, the only life worth fighting for is an unborn one. And after the child is brought into our world, if it is a life born into poverty, then it is a life unworthy of dignity. Thanks for watching another video. I appreciate you sticking through this one, as it's not an easy topic to discuss with tact, but I hope I did okay. I'm sure this isn't every aspect of the abortion argument, but I think there's enough here to relay an understanding of what is misrepresented in the discussion. But please, leave any thoughts you do have down in the comments below. I thank you again for watching. Like and subscribe if that's something you want to do. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and be the best you can be today. Bye.